All right, hello and welcome to Making the Argument Interviews edition. And today we have a very special guest who has just released a new book called America Awakened, The Collapse of Globalism and the Return to Faith, Family, and Freedom. Now, look, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you've heard us talk about a lot of issues that are happening not just within the United States, but are happening across the globe. We're not just seeing kind of the backlash against what we might call the globalist interpretation of civilization and society that has been very prevalent for several decades now. We're not just seeing that in the United States. We're actually seeing it in places like Argentina. We're seeing it in places like Germany, France, the UK, Japan, where we're actually seeing new parties emerge which are challenging the status quo. And the question has always been, okay, what is the motivation behind that? Because if you listen to the left describe it, it's just the rise of fascism. That's the only way that they can explain what's going on. And of course, they think it's evil and bad, and they don't seem to be all that interested in actually hearing from the people that actually are supporting these political parties. In fact, in places like Germany, they're just trying to outlaw them. And so this begs the question, what is actually going on? Is it something to be excited about? Is it something to be concerned about? Is it a little bit of both? Well, Dr. Steve Turley actually explains quite a bit of this in his new book, and I'm very excited to talk to him and ask him some questions. So, Doctor, thank you very much for being on today.
Oh, Nick, it's an honor to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, again, you've had a robust career. You have a doctorate in philosophy. You've taught for many years. You're a big advocate of the classical education. You have an incredibly successful YouTube channel where you talk about a wide range of topics from faith, freedom, family, politics, all of those things. And again, perhaps most importantly, you're also a classical guitarist.
That's right. That's how I bought my groceries at the beginning. Believe it or not, not many groceries to buy with it, but it was I always circle back to the classical guitar at some point. It's pretty cool.
Good. Well, listen, I want to jump right into the book because, as I've looked at these various movements that have taken place and I've looked at the various arguments that have been made, again, it's this idea that, gosh, what we're seeing is not just populism, it's nationalistic populism. And that's, of course, to be feared. And, don't we remember World War II? And,
exactly,
and anybody that he associates with any of this is clearly, a Nazi or a fascist or whatever the pejorative is commonly thrown at us. And it does seem like this tendency toward globalization. And I'm going to be specific. I mean, globalization in the sense where we're putting far more emphasis on international organizations as opposed to national ones. It's kind of a loss of national identity, this idea of kind of cultural relativism, and that, we can just move people around. And if you have any problems with this or any concerns about it, well, that's just because you're a xenophobe or a racist, et cetera.
Right.
All these things have been predominant through almost all of the West culturally shaping institutions within the last several decades. And yet, something seems to be changing. And that has led you in your book to say that we are living in the most exciting times in modern history.
Yeah.
Exciting how, I realize exciting can go two different directions, right? There can be good exciting and there can be bad exciting. What sort of exciting are you suggesting?
Yeah. So I'm calling this era that we're all living in as the most exciting in modern history, because even though our institutions are in decline, even though the liberal international order continues to try to bully itself, it lags, as it were, into our lives. Even though we have like the bullies in Brussels, the WEF, the demons in Davos, as I like to call them, they're still around as well. Even though we're seeing our cities crumble, we're seeing a lot of confusion in our culture. I never, ever ignore that, and the book addresses that. Nevertheless, there is this extraordinary surge of renewal happening. Faith, family, national traditions, what globalist elites sought to suppress for so many decades, are actually being unstoppably revived. So, for example, we're seeing the rise of what scholars call restoration politics, which involves a return to a nation's culture, customs, and traditions after decades of globalist interventionism. Just this weekend, they had parliamentary elections in Japan. A lot of people didn't catch this. And there was a brand new Trump-inspired Japan First Party. We're talking literally months old, called Sanseito. And Sanseito literally means let's return the government to the people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let that hit you. Yeah, let's return to it. Let's wrench government from the control of these globalist elites, and let's return it to the people. Nick, they went from 1 seat in parliament to now 15 seats.
Mm-hmm.
They 15x'd, and they are now the third largest party in parliament just over this weekend. And it's literally the same thing. Border security, economic security, cultural security. Those three themes that we're hearing in Europe, that we're hearing in India, that we're hearing in Argentina, and El Salvador, and in this movement we all know is Make America Great Again. Let's restore America. We're seeing it in the renewal of Orthodox Russia. We're seeing it in the return of Confucian China. To this day, President Xi, he's been kind of hiding of late for the last few weeks. It's very interesting what's going on there. But he's been talking about China's not so much communist as it is modernist Confucian. You've got Prime Minister Modi of India touting Hindu nationalism surging throughout his country. You have Erdogan in Ottoman Turkey. This is restorationism, the notion that going back is actually the best way forward.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So I want to ask a question on this. Like, so I always try to steel man the other argument, because I'm someone that I think of myself as very patriotic, and I appreciate the concept of the nation state. I appreciate this idea that we don't all agree. There's been this notion in the 20th century, especially the late 20th century, among the classical liberal tradition, that we had figured out what the optimal style of government and economics was, and now it was our burden to take this to the rest of the world and gently nudge or bomb them right into acceptance of our worldview. Right. And I think through some very, very hard lessons and some very, very hard military campaigns that probably should have at least never been fought to the extent that they were, we've kind of realized, not everyone agrees on how to organize society, or the role of the family, or the role of government, or the role of religion. And maybe it's not a good idea to try to push this or impose this, but to allow people to kind of organically develop within their own civilizations in a way that makes sense for that civilization. Yeah. And so you can look at what you're describing as restorative, that kind of restoration politics or restorative politics, is that, hey, we're going to go back to the root of what is central to our culture, what has always been central to who we are and our cultural identity. Ladies and gentlemen, the good news is we have finally defunded Planned Parenthood. That means your tax dollars are no longer going to the destruction of innocent human life. However, we only did it for a year, which means we have to continue to stay engaged. And one of the best ways that you can do that is by working with Live Action. I've worked with them for years. They are one of the most effective pro-life organizations in the country, because they don't just engage politically, they engage culturally. In fact, their social media reaches out and touches people about 40 million times per month. And that's because the content they put out there is good. It is impactful. And if you would like to support them, you can actually go and give them a monthly gift of $20.25 as a thank you. And you will receive your handy dandy Live Action mug, Save the Babies. In fact, if you want to figure out more on how to do this, text Nick to 70723. That's NICK to 70723, and help one of the most effective pro-life organizations in the country. Go text it today. We can also agree that, okay, for some civilizations, that could be kind of dangerous.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
I don't particularly want to see a rise of the Mongol horde return. Right. Like so where do we, when you say exciting, I think that's actually the right term, right? Because I can see why it's happening, but does it give you any pause or concern? Because the other thing I can do is I can recognize that part of the reason why the international order was established after World II, that it was, is we had just come after two major world wars that were incredibly destructive. We now had the advent and use of atomic weapons, where now mankind truly had within its power the ability to create its own extinction level event. And so there's this idea that well, we just came out of these wars that were kind of rooted in nationalism and, various versions of maybe manifest destiny or whatnot. And so, hey, we got to tamp that down a little bit. So do you have any sympathy for why some of these things were put in place in the first place? And do you think as we move back to this restoration mindset of recapturing national identity, is it just a pendulum swing, a complete rejection of it? Or do you think it's kind of a reevaluation and a reform of it?
I like that term, reevaluation and reform. Right? Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, kind of thing. Yeah, because you're gonna have to have some kind of international order. You're gonna have to have some basis for international order. So whether it's the rules-based order or whether it's more great power politics, whatever it is, you're going to have the multipolarity and so on. You're going to have something like that. Yeah, I mean, I would rewind a little bit, and I would push back on the notion that nationalism somehow got us into World War I, World War II, just blanket tribalistic nationalism. The 20th century cannot be understood apart from the era of the 19th century, which is the era of colonization and imperialism. And that can't be understood apart from the 18th century, which is the era of the Enlightenment, the European Enlightenment. And the key with the Enlightenment, this is key, is they believed, and we're talking like David Hume and Immanuel Kant and so forth, some of the most boring men to ever don a wig. But these guys made the argument that we had finally arrived. It's very interesting the way you kind of brought out, think of Frank Fukuyama on the end of history thesis in the 1990s. We had finally arrived to the one true way of understanding reality that could bypass the subjective preconceptions of the knower. And that was through what they consider to be what they would call scientific rationalism, that applying the method of scientific rationalism to any question, how do I know this? How do I know that? If I apply the scientific method, at the end of that method, I could either verify or falsify my original hypothesis. Great, we love it. If I'm going to go and get a used car, I'm going to be the most scientific method guy on the planet, no question. But they went all the way with it. And they said, now we've actually arrived to a way that we can know that can bypass subjective preconception. It could bypass the king's supposed charism that he had by virtue of his anointing by the church, that he had a special knowledge and therefore he had a special right to rule. We could bypass that. We don't need kings. We don't need bishops. We don't need any. All we need is method. Method is the key. And then that translates in the 19th century. If we have one true way of understanding the world, now we can have a one true way of governing the world. Now we can abstract systems, political systems, economic systems that could be superimposed on all cultures, because by definition, the method bypasses cultural subjectivity. So that's the 19th century. And then that morphs into three options. We had three options of what was going to be the dominant one-size-fits-all political economic system to take over the world. The first one that rose was Western liberalism. The second one was Soviet communism. And then the third was Nazi fascism. So we could claim these are kind of nationalist or whatever, but their goal was to bypass the nation, actually take over the world. And so obviously Soviet communism and Western liberalism teamed up and knocked out Nazi fascism. And then they went after each other for the next several decades in the Cold War period. And then December 25th, 1991, God has a sense of humor, the most atheistic regime in human history falls on Christmas Day. The Soviet Union falls. And then Frank Fukuyama comes in and says literally verbatim what the Enlightenment philosophers were saying 200 years earlier. We have now finally arrived at the one true political and economic system for all peoples, all times, all places. at the which he argued was Western liberalism, and he thought we were going there inevitably. It was literally a kind of dialectical materialism. I mean, he actually used Hegel.
Gosh dang Hegel, man.
Yeah, he used it. So my students used to read his essay. So it first came out as an essay. I forget, in foreign affairs or something. First came out as an essay, and then End of History turned into his book. My students would read The End of History, and I would ask them, what do you think? And so these would be very interesting discussions because it was such a bold theory. But they would also read at the same time another theory, a thesis that came out at the exact same time, early 90s, and that was Sam Huntington of Harvard University, and that's The Clash of Civilizations.
Yeah.
And what Huntington argued was Frank Fukuyama was totally misreading, and John Mearsheimer has since more or less taken up Sam Huntington's mantle. John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago. They're both big critics of Frank Fukuyama, and they basically said what he missed, what he didn't realize, is that the fall of the Soviet Union didn't represent the triumph of this one-size-fits-all political and economic system. What it represented was the death of the ideological commitment to one-size-fits-all systems. And that death happened in the Soviet sphere, and it's inevitably going to happen in the Western liberal sphere. Just give it time. And Nick, it's not a coincidence who emerges on the scene of American politics right around this time in 1992. One Patrick J. Buchanan, who argued literally that. He said, that's where we're going. We're going back to the nation state, away from systems, because nobody believes in it anymore. Yeah. Nobody buys it anymore. It's very organic. Again, it's a great idea, as it were, but like Homer Simpson once lectured little Lisa, Lisa, that's a theory. You think it works, like communism. You think it works in theory, right? Yeah. It's just, okay, in theory it might work, but in the hearts and minds of people, Soviet Union lost a third of its land overnight. Yeah. Because everybody went nationalist, from Georgia to Armenia to Ukraine to Belarus. They all went nationalist. They all left. And the most nationalistic nations right now in Europe, all Eastern Central Europe, especially Hungary and Viktor Orban and Poland and so forth. Yeah. So the whole point is what Huntington has argued is we are moving from an era, literally a 300-year era of ideology, to an era of identity. An era that said, originally in the 20th century, what do I believe? Am I a communist or am I a capitalist? To an era that could care less about those questions. Now it's, who am I? To what do I belong? What's my religion? What's my region? What's my race? That's why race is just it's permeating on the left. Yeah. The left is more ethno-nationalist than the right. I mean, Joy Reid is more ethno-nationalist than Richard Spencer.
Yeah.
But it's because we're seeing what they call, the technical term is this re-territorialization. These systems, these highfalutin, IMF, WTO, World Bank systems are collapsing. And as they collapse, the pieces are getting re-territorialized. So now identity becomes the number one key characteristic of politics. And so that means we're going to have to work out, and we're still trying to work it out. It's not set in stone yet. That means we're going to have to rework I wouldn't say a rules-based order, but an international order that recognizes great powers rising up, a multipolar world where every sphere kind of has its own sovereign sense. We can't really butt in anymore. We just can't. There's just no way around that. The frames of reference, the ideological frames of reference that justified that butting in, because we have the true way of understanding the world, irrespective of your primitive culture, they're gone. Now that primitive culture is looking right back at us and saying, but that's your culture. Yeah. That's your European culture imposing itself on us, claiming that science is the ultimate value. We don't believe that.
Well, I think this is interesting too, because it's one of those things where I look at the concept of reevaluation and reform rather than outright rejection, and what is actually taking place. Because I can appreciate Hume's contributions to various arguments with respect to civilization, but there's this one Hume quote that I love, and I think this kind of, for me, this signals my problem with the so-called Enlightenment. Right? I'm not suggesting that nothing good came out of the Enlightenment, but David Hume said, if we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school of metaphysics, for instance, let us ask,
I know it.
Does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. And it's this argument, like you said, of this scientific rationalism, that we can throw out anything with metaphysics, anything with religion, because now we have scientific rationalism that is going to explain everything to us. And you look at this quote and like, that's great, David. I have a question. Does this quote contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or matter? Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No? Okay. Well, then by your own standard, I guess I should commit it to the flames.
Throw it to the flames. Right? That's right. That's right. That's the irony. Yep.
And I do feel like, and I feel like this is a problem with Marx as well. And I don't want to get too far afield on this, but I think it's important to bring up because you said something very important. And we view things so much from the lens of World War II and post-World War II that we don't go far enough back to actually understand what led us up to those points and the consensus that took place after that. But you saw with Marx was going to try to achieve identity through economics.
Right.
It was workers of the world unite, that I was supposed to have more in common with somebody who was in my same economic bracket in, let's say, Malaysia, than I was with somebody that lives 4 neighborhoods away who makes twice what I make.
Exactly.
And that's absurd, because all of the things for which you get some sense of meaning, purpose, identity, you ask anybody about that, what do they say? They start talking about their faith. They start talking about family. They start talking about cultural history and traditions. Yep. And so this idea that I'm going to identify exclusively through my economic status is rejected. Maybe the more fascist idea that I'm going to identify both through my economic status and my nationalism, or this other ideology of race, that's going to be the primary function. And that gets rejected. And then you're looking at the final of Western liberalism, where it's like, well, no, I'm going to be identified through this concept of, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and tolerance, and an open society concept. And well, okay, no, but that still doesn't provide ultimate purpose and meaning. And so I think you're right. I think when we start to understand this through the lens of, we were trying to find some sort of system by which we could identify that ultimately, in many respects, I mean, you can always point to people like John Locke and others that didn't, accept this, but kind of rejected God, rejected, aspects of national identity. And we're going for these higher ideals that these international organizations were going to, deliver to us on a case-by-case basis. So you mentioned something in the book that I think is important, because I never heard it before. And you argued that we're not just, and I think it's related to what we've just talked about. You're not just talking about political populism. You're talking about what you refer to as civilizational populism. How do you distinguish between the two?
Yeah, no, that's great. And again, I think it's key to understanding the moment we're in and why it's so exciting, as it were. So civilizational populism is let's go back. So those are the two terms there. Let's start with populism, because that's what a lot of people are more familiar with. What makes populism populist is that it inverts the political divide. So we generally think of the political divide as a horizontal divide, left versus right? Republicans versus Democrat, conservative versus liberal, whatever. And that might be legit, and we're always using those terms. That's fine. But the dynamic that operates behind populist movements is they invert that divide to a vertical divide. So it moves from this horizontal left versus right to now this vertical people versus the political class, ordinary citizens versus the oligarchs, the ruled versus the rulers. So you go back to 2010. There's a very good book by Doug Schoen and Rasmussen called Mad as Hell. It's a really well written book on the Tea Party movement, and they were collecting so much data. Scott Rasmussen and Doug Schoen, both pollsters, and their thesis in the book is we're watching in real time a political realignment happening, and the political realignment is moving away from this horizontal divide to this vertical divide. People increasingly recognize there is freaking no difference between Democrats and Republicans. It doesn't matter who they elect. Their government doesn't change. It doesn't matter. And people on the left are realizing that. People on the right are realizing that. And so that's populism. Now, civilizationalist populism explains why that's happening. So, because populism by its nature is not very ideological, obviously. You can have a populist, I'm almost contradicting myself, but you can have a populist left, the Bernie Sanders, right? So, and you can have a populist right, like Donald Trump. You see that in Europe all the time. The Five-Star Movement in Italy was a populist left party, while Lega was populist right. And Steve Bannon brought them together after the 2018 election there, where they formed a non-establishment government. Two outside parties came in and formed a government for a couple of years. So populism itself doesn't really have a lot of ideological import. If I said I'm a populist, you don't know where I'm necessarily coming from outside of that vertical.
It almost gives off a kind of it almost gives off kind of a class warfare, or at the very least, the regular people versus the elites kind of vibe, right? But what they want to accomplish can vary greatly based off of who the regular folks are and who the elites are. So I get what you're saying.
You got it. So this is where civilizationalism comes in. If populism is more structural, civilizationalism then fills in the content, as it were, of why there is that divide. And what civilizationalism is basically arguing is that our elites, our political elites, have sold out our national sovereignty, our economic sovereignty, and our cultural uniqueness for their own political and economic gain. So they're opening up our borders to bring in cheap labor, so as to maximize margins for their CEO donors. They're shipping out manufacturing and industry. So those open borders work in both directions. So there's cheap labor coming in, but then there's all these manufacturing and industrial jobs leaking out to third world countries. And then when that's doing is it's bringing in a finance economy in the United States where our cosmopolitan, urban areas have so much capital and finance and banking, accumulating around them. All the while, our rural populations remain highly unemployed, seeing all their jobs going away. And then we saw that in the Yellow Vest uprising in France, where, I can't get a job where I live in the rural area, but I can't live where there are jobs in Paris because of all the gentrification and the prices have gone up. So what we found is that rural workers had to drive about an hour and a half each way to one of the major cities in France to work. And then Macron comes around and slaps a fuel tax on them in the name of green energy. And they blew up, rightly so. They blew up. And they were like, what the hell? You not only you get rid of all of our jobs, exporting it out to third world nations. And then the only jobs I have, I can't work where I live and I can't live where there's work. And then you're going to throw a freaking tax on me after that. You're going to ruin my life and then tax me for it. So more and more populations are recognizing that our elites, our political and economic elites, are selling out our national sovereignty, our economic sovereignty, and especially our cultural sovereignty. Because when we rise up and say, you shouldn't do that, they call us xenophobic. They call us racist. They call us bigots. So wokeness provides the cloak, the veneer of righteousness that they get to hide behind when all is said and done. They're simply increasing their own power and affluence. While wages have remained flat for the last 30 years, CEO bonuses just in Wall Street alone have gone up by over 300%.
Well, let me ask you a question on this, because again, I'm a free market guy, right? I've always been I think the Austrian School of Economics, I'm always very intrigued by Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And Milton Friedman, like all these guys. And I've always seen, especially people like Thomas Sowell or Milton Friedman, these are patriotic guys. These are guys that love America. Like I don't see any desire by them to sell out the country. And so the thing that's always concerned me when we talk about the populist component here is I completely agree that the system's been rigged. And I think that's largely been as a result of monetary policy. I think it's been a result of inflationary policy.
Yeah, definitely.
And the bottom line is, whenever a government starts engaging in inflationary monetary policy, the two groups that benefit the most are the government institutions and organizations, which get the money first and spend it.
Exactly.
And then generally the bank or the world of finance, who are usually getting access very quickly as well. And the justification is always, well, we're saving everybody's 401ks, or we're saving the real estate market, or whatever it is. And the end result is the person that's just trying to work a regular job, their savings is evaporated. They can't afford groceries, and they're sitting here wondering why. Yes. And then the left comes in and goes, oh, it's greedy rich people. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. These government systems were set in place, and I agree that there's corruption involved here. But I certainly don't want the solution to be that, we just need to engage in wanton class warfare and redistribution.
And Nick, if I could just even put in parentheses there, this is part of the brilliance of the RFK Trump alliance, because when he was getting grilled during his confirmation hearings, particularly by Pocahontas, right, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie, he absolutely skewered them, saying, you are the biggest takers of pharmaceutical contribution. So when it's like, oh, it's all these greedy rich people, you mean like your donors? You mean the people who bought you? So exactly. It doesn't, that kind of rhetoric doesn't work anymore with a civilizational populist structure.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because now that we've kind of like laid the groundwork, and we've talked a little bit about the history, why we've gotten to this movement, kind of the different defining terms. When you talk about the Trump revolution and the realignment, you don't mean 2016.
Right.
You mean the last one. So you make a distinction when you talk about the Trump revolution. You're not saying first term, you're saying the second term. Yeah. Why do you think the second term is a much better representation of what is happening and what you're describing than the first term?
Yeah, so the first term were the warning rumbles of the political earthquake coming, and we saw it. So what happened in 2016 is we had about 200 counties in Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Minnesota that had voted Democrat in every single presidential election since 1984, suddenly switch and vote for Trump, some by 20-point margins. Hillary was totally blindsided by this. Mm-hmm. And what had happened was that the white working class defected. It's the exact same thing we're seeing all throughout Europe right now. They were always labor, like in the UK, for example, they were always labor voters. And now they feel totally abandoned by their center-left party. So they're going center-right, or more nationalist populist right, precisely because of this inversion of this political realignment. What you saw in 2024 was now the non-white working class join that coalition like never before. So Trump got a massive amount of Latino support. He actually won Latino men with a 20-point swing. They voted Trump 36% in 2020, 54% in 2024. I mean, Democrats can't survive that kind of swing.
I'll tell you the biggest one that shocked me. And I know we're going to get into this, is if you look at young voters.
Yes.
If you look at 20 or younger, Trump won. Like they broke it down into 4 demographics: minority women, minority men, white women, white men. Trump won white men, which he expected, white women, which, minority men.
Yep.
Right. And then the only group that he lost out, incredibly with was the minority women.
Women, females, yeah.
And even that dipped a little bit than what they were expecting. And so do you think, let me put it this way. Do you think the first term Trump kind of went in there with this idea that he was going to reform things, but he needed to understand how DC works? So he brought in people into the cabinet that, ostensibly were competent, understood how Washington DC worked, but shared no real passion for reform. And then his second time around, he was basically like, well, screw that. I'm not making that mistake again. I'm bringing in reformers. Let's face it. You need more red meat. That's right. We all need more red meat. And not only that, but you need more red meat wrapped in bacon. And it's a good thing the Good Ranchers has got you covered. That's right. You can go to goodranchers.com and use my special code Nick to order your subscription of the best American raised. I don't mean feedlot in Guadalajara and then shipped to America. I mean American raised beef, pork, poultry, and wild-caught seafood. That's right. You can all get it delivered to your door in the subscription of your choice. Plus, if you do use my code Nick, not only are you going to get $40 off your entire order, you'll also get the option of free meat with your subscription. That's right. I eat Good Ranchers almost daily at this point. And I'm going to tell you right now, they have spoiled me on every other meat selection. So if you're someone that doesn't want your meat raised in some random place around the world, filled up with additives and then brought to you, if you want the real, genuine article, goodranchers.com, use my code Nick, sign up for one of those subscriptions. I promise you, you are not going to regret it. Like, do you feel that 4-year hiatus was actually critical to get the Donald Trump that we have now?
I do. I mean, I'm a re-mythologized guy. I talk about it in the book because I do think Trump's support is very mythic. And the hero's journey, the story arc of the hero's journey, we saw it most recently in Maverick, the movie Maverick. There does have to be a winter period. There does have to be a wilderness period. There has to be this period where you just feel so lost from the promise of what you originally were given. And then you see that promise realized in ways you never even imagined. And again, it's the Lord of the Rings. The hero's journey story arc is Donald Trump. I mean, he's embracing that. Absolutely. I think so. I think in this first term, we have to remember no one in the Republican establishment liked him.
Yeah.
No one.
When he first ran, I was like, so I have been hardcore conservative in some areas. You could call, conservatarian. Yeah. Very, very against the government. Very against our fiat currency and the Fed. You name it.
Yeah.
Right? That's me.
Ron Paul. Yeah.
And so when Donald Trump comes in there, I'm like, who the hell do you think you are? Like you were advocating for assault weapons bans and donating to Hillary Clinton 5 seconds ago. Now you're supposed to be in charge here. Yeah, and so I was in this unique position of not liking the Republican establishment. Right? And not trusting this guy. And I remember as he got in there and he started to do things, I was like, oh my God, like he's serious.
He really believes this stuff.
He's serious. Yeah. And then when he came back in the second term, I was like, now I was enthusiastic. Now I was enthusiastic.
Yeah. And that's it. That journey is a microcosm of the macro journey for the Republican Party. No, Ted Cruz refused to endorse him. Yeah. Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan were laughing behind his back. They're like, this city is going to eat you alive. Yeah. You have no idea. He had no friends. It was literally like an Athanasius kind of thing. Trump contra mundum, Trump against the world. Mm-hmm. They got rid of him in 2020 in that successful coup. I think it was basically a ballot-based coup in 5 states. They got rid of him. And they thought that was it. They could, wipe their hands off him, especially after J6. And lo and behold,
and then they tried to make an example out of him.
Exactly. Don't you dare even think about putting in one of these populist candidates. Don't you even think about it. We rule you. We are the rules-based order, and we are the rulers of the rules.
The rulers-based order.
The rulers-based order. Exactly. And I think what happened, especially with the disaster of the Biden bleak winter, the Biden years, I think everyone suddenly realized this guy is on to something, and and he just remained faithful no matter what they threw at him, no matter how many indictments, no matter how many times they shoot him. He just kept coming back, and he was willing to fight, and he would never back down.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, this is our guy. And he galvanized the nation, won all 7 swing states, 2,800 counties out of 3,100, 2,800 swung towards Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, that says it all.
Oh, it does. Well, and to that point, you also, because I feel like there's a big difference between Trump, 2024, Trump 2016.
Yes, definitely.
And mainly in the way that he viewed the bureaucracy and what they were attempting to do. I think he went into 2024 with a lot more, like you said, popular support, because again, there was people like me that were open to what he was saying, but didn't believe him.
Very skeptical,
very skeptical, right? Because I felt
rightly so, based on what he had said in the past. Absolutely.
I felt like I had been fighting this fight longer, this guy, and this guy was acting like I was the problem. Like, it was screw you, dude, right? But then he comes back in 2024 and he's on fire.
Yeah.
Now, there's another side to that, right? And you bring this up in the book. You talk about this idea of a Caesar-like figure, and not just in the United States, but in other places as well. We did a podcast a while back where because I don't have a favorable impression of Caesar. But I think I get what you're talking about here. We had a podcast a while back where we said Cincinnatus, Sulla, or Caesar.
Ooh,
and we were talking about the Roman Republic, and Cincinnatus.
You nerds, you. Oh, I love it.
Totally, big time nerds.
I love it.
But we went with that whole idea of, okay, what does Trump potentially represent here? Is he the Sulla figure that takes in power and restores the republic and then goes back to his farm, or is he the Sulla figure that marches in and is very heavy-handed, but then tries to establish a system to prevent future Sullas now that things are fixed? Or is he the Caesar figure that eventually results in the ending of the Republic and into the Principate or the Imperial era of
Imperial,
Rome?
yeah.
And so what do you so when you talk about him representing a return of Caesar type figures, or maybe strongman type figures, what do you mean, and what do you think that means for what we would call kind of the classically liberal democratic West, where the whole experiment has been, how do we prevent concentration of power in the hands of a single entity or powerful executive?
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. No, absolutely. So I'm using that Caesar figure in a very mythic sense, as opposed to a historical sense. Though I draw from history, particularly Oswald Spengler, who wrote The End of Civilization. He's the one who came up with this term Caesar figure. But what he noticed is that throughout history, when civilizations are facing crisis and decline, the population does look for a larger than life, literally savior figure who has mythic appeal, like a Caesar, like a Constantine, like a George Washington, to emerge, to reestablish order and inspire collective purpose. So, I mean, when Trump walks into a UFC arena like no other politician on the freaking planet, not even Dana White can get that kind of, Dana White looks small compared to Trump. When he walks in that arena and the people go nuts, I mean, even a CNN panelist said it looked like a conquering Caesar returning back to the Colosseum to adoring fans.
His triumph.
Exact. And it is, right? I mean, he's flanked by RFK behind him, and Tulsi and JD and Marco and all that. And so in a sense, it's we've won. And then you have the gladiators, after they win, literally bowing to the guy and giving him their belts, as a
very
gesture.
Hail Caesar moment.
Exactly. And so what this is, it has nothing to do with, again, it's kind of this mythic sense. It has nothing to do with the politics per se, the specifics of the political system. It is this mythic exaltation, this archetype that resonates with the human mind. We all, I mean, this is Jordan Peterson 101, but we all our minds think mythically. When I use the term mythos, the Greek term mythos, it literally refers to the meta narratives that shape the way we order data. So if I'm driving, and if I'm looking anywhere and everywhere, I'm going to get into an accident. So what I have to do is I have to value my life and my passengers' lives and value getting to my destination so as to be able to rightly order all the data around me. So I focus on one thing, and that's what myths do. That's what the heroes do. That's why we love movies. It's why we love music. It's why we love stories, right? They help shape our sense. And then again, that's where culture comes in. Culture provides that value system that provides the basis for being able to prioritize the data. So when I call Trump a Caesar figure, he is that archetype. He is that mythic figure that represents we're getting our country back. We are wrenching our country away from those who were bringing it to the abyss, and intentionally so. They are post-American. They hate America. They believe America has to pay for its sins by being the sacrificial lamb. They want to get rid. They are more dedicated to protecting illegal migrants than they are citizens, because those citizens help create such a sinful, horrible country. At least these illegal migrants can come back and pillage us the way we pillage them.
Yeah, well, and in the critical theory dynamic, the critical theory explanation, which is rooted in a lot of neo-Marxist ideology as well, is it's oppressors and oppressed, and the illegal immigrants coming here are the oppressed, and we're the oppressors. And so, to the extent that they are better off economically or socially as a result of, maybe something that represents a decline for us, that's just. Yes, that's not something to be avoided. That's something to be encouraged.
Exactly.
Well, let me ask you this, because I really want to get into kind of, because you talk about some topics here that most people, when you pick up a book that you associate with maybe a political discussion, get very uncomfortable with. But before I lead into that, it's this idea that, so Trump is president and he has a Republican Congress, and we have a favorable Supreme Court, as favorable as we've had in quite some time. But there's still a lot of restrictions on what the president can actually do without concurrence from Congress and the judiciary. And this was all set up on purpose, right? This isn't by accident. This is actually a frustration I have sometimes when I'm debating not debating, but when I'm having a conversation, why hasn't Trump done this? Or why hasn't so-and-so done that? It's like, well, do you like
Article
the
1,
Constitution,
Article 2, Article
right?
3,
Read it, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, yeah, but look at Javier Milei. And I'm like, I'm a big fan of Javier Milei.
Yeah.
But I also understand that Trump doesn't have the power to just say, hey, all these executive branch agencies, you're gone now. Javier Milei did.
Yeah. It's a very presidency-heavy system in Argentina.
Yeah.
That's right.
So that has led me to the conclusion that one of two things is going to happen. And I really want to get your take on this, because one path is, are we talking about significantly altering our Constitution? Because that just seems something that's, and increasing the power of the executive, or because that, again, there's something within me as an American that just like recoils at this. While understanding that, just like you said, there's those moments in time where you feel like the system has been so overwhelmed that there needs to be a correction. And how do you attain that correction? I can understand, just like the Roman Republic had a mechanism for dealing for those times of crisis that is not really built into our Constitution. I can understand the appeal toward that. I can also understand the problems with it.
Yes.
The thing I'm really hopeful for, because I do like our constitutional system, right? I do like, but I don't see how John Adams said it best. Our Constitution was written for religious and moral people and is totally unsuited to the government of any other.
Right.
And in your book, you talk a lot about culture, about education, about religion, about spiritual warfare. You talk about these cultural, educational aspects that impact politics, but are still their own realm.
Yes.
And how do you see the what we might call the culturally shaping institutions of our society? How do you see that fight going? Because sometimes I think we get very, very obsessed with the next election cycle without
Right.
fighting for the very cultural institutions which impact what we think about ourselves. Like if you JD Vance, I thought JD Vance said something so important at the Munich
Isn't he
Security
great?
Conference.
I mean, JD is like, I just call him 48 at this point. I am so excited about a JD Vance presidency.
Well, he said something so important at the Munich Security Conference that I don't think people picked up on, or they didn't give it the proper attention. Because he was essentially saying, you guys keep talking about external threats in the form of someone like Putin. And essentially, fine, granted, you don't have a population willing to fight and die for the civilizations you claim to want to protect.
Yeah. Wow.
And so why do you think these questions of religion, culture, education are so critical to the preservation of a culture worth defending?
Wow. Oh my, Nick, that's that's all right. Let's restart the podcast here. That is deep. That's awesome. Yeah, I that was an amazing speech. If I recall, it was back in February, and it was unbelievable. And I mean, that room was silent as JD just tore into them. Exactly. You keep looking at external threats. What about the threat right here? The threat to free speech, the threat to people being able to express their grievances with their government that you keep trying to clamp down on. Yeah. So, bottom line, more and more people are recognizing this. And to be honest with you, a lot of our ilk, ironically, our conservative ilk, are a little bit late to this party. No problem. Come on in. Plenty to drink. We're going to have fun. But they're a little late here. And I noticed that over the last 8 years since I've been doing the YouTube. Ironically, Trump wasn't. He recognized it. Every culture has a cult. There's no way around that. Every culture has a cult. And what I mean by that's not that people knock on your doors and want you to worship lettuce or something like that.
They're called vegans.
I mean by right. We're going back. I'll nerd out with you too. I'm going back to the Latin cultus.
Yeah.
And again, the Romans recognized this. It didn't matter, Republican Romans, Imperial Romans, it didn't matter. It goes back to the word cultus, and cultus means worship. And at the heart of every culture is what cultural anthropologists call the sacred. And these are rules, understandings, and goals considered absolute and unquestionable. I mean, you think about it, I'm driving down the road speeding, and I get pulled over by a police officer, which just happened actually last week. He was very nice. Just gave me a warning. But can you imagine if I just rolled down my window and I say, I don't really like that law? Yeah. Or even if I didn't even roll down my window, I'd say, no, thank you. No, move on. I'm okay. I would miss the fact that I don't get to define the law defines me. And just again, the way you were talking about with the constitutional structure and so forth, maybe I've got an activist bone in my body and I want to change that law. Great. How am I going to do it? Petitions, run for office, whatever. I change the law by following it. I changed the law, but there's always going to be rules, understandings, and goals considered absolute and unquestionable. And what scholars have noticed is you can trace that sanctity, meaning these are rules, understandings, and goals that are not optional, that we don't get to discuss and deliberate and so forth. They are set apart as basically written in stone, as it were. You can go back and you will find that it goes ultimately to some kind of sacred text, belief, affirmation, creed, whatever it is, or person, whatever it is, that is itself the source for all absoluteness, all unquestionableness, and the like. So the question is never whether we're going to have a religion. Yeah. The question is always which one.
Yeah.
And that's what woke. That is the devil's bargain that wokeness called. That's the bluff, I guess I should say, that wokeness called. You want to get rid of Christianity from the classroom? No problem. Then we're going to move in the pride flags. You're always going to have a religion. You're always going to have icons. You're always going to be bowing down to something, as it were.
Well, and that's because let's face it. If you want to, anytime you say you ought, you are appealing to objective morality.
Exactly.
Objective morality, and objective an objective moral law requires an objective moral lawgiver.
Exactly.
And like I've gotten this before where people want to fight me with it about it, where it's like, oh, Nick, I love your economic policy and I love your trade policy and I love your renditions of history, but I wish you'd leave the God stuff out. I'm like, I can't. It's the foundation. What you believe about God is the foundation of your worldview. Even if you reject God, that's the foundation of your worldview. And you will come up with some sort of system in your head. The problem is that it'll be a question of, is it utilitarian? Is it might makes right? Is it just what works for you in the moment? And then how do you build a society around, well, it's whatever works for us at the moment. Works for who? The strongest, the weakest, the like, and
Nick,
and
this is why I love talking with someone like yourself, because notice how we're about to close a loop here. How did this discussion start? 18th century Enlightenment. One size fits all way of knowing the world that bypasses culture, nation, population, tradition, history, and so forth. So these guys claim they're conservatives. These guys claim they're MAGA, but then they have an epistemology that is fundamentally globalist.
Yeah. Gosh. Well, how do you see, one of the things I'm a huge advocate on, all 10 years that I served in the Virginia General Assembly, and I'm on my final year, people would ask me like, Nick, what's the one thing, if you could achieve it, like that would be your goal. Like you would take that vote, you would carry that bill, you get it passed, and you could retire or you could lose your seat even, and you'd be like, don't care, worth it. And I always said it's education reform. I've always said it's education reform. I said I would like to recapture this idea that the state is not supposed to have this degree of control over our education that it does. And you've worked in education for a long time, both as a doctoral student and as a teacher. How do you see the role of education in kind of shaping the sort of country that will allow, let's say, for the civilizational populism or the restitution of America in the direction that we want it to go, as opposed to, I always say there's alternatives to the current system that we don't necessarily want, or alternatives. The inverse of woke ideology or whatnot doesn't necessarily, a rejection of woke doesn't mean you're going to get what you want.
Yeah,
so
well said.
As we look forward and as we look into, what do we think will happen? What do we want to happen? And how do you see things like education and a return to the church? We're seeing young men return to the church in groves, and they tend to be returning to more of the structural, what we might call the Catholicism, orthodoxy. How do you see that factoring in to that maybe restoration of what we mean of kind of American identity and culture, and why do you think it plays such an important role?
Okay, I'm going to continue to nerd out since you brought in Caesar and all that. There's an ancient Greek term called paideia. We still use the term like for a pediatrician. It means child, paideia. And paideia, it fundamentally actually meant culture. It was the Greek version of cultura, the Latin cultura. And but it got associated with children because the ancient Greeks believed that a good education was an education that faithfully imparted to the children the sacred ways, their traditions, their customs, their cultures, the things they love. I'm 56 now, and I had one of the most wonderful experiences I've had becoming sort of known on social media was I got a Facebook message from my 4th grade teacher who I loved. She was young, she was single, she was beautiful. Miss Coates, if you're out there, I love you. I'll
First teacher crush. We've all had
first teacher crush. Since then, of course, she's married. She's got 4 kids. She's great, that kind of stuff. But we fawned over. We loved her. And she left that year. There were budget cuts. I think it was 79 or 80 or whatever. And she had to leave that year. And gosh, we were all bawling and crying on the last day of school because she was really the first teacher. I think I speak for all my classmates where we really felt like she loved us. She contacted me out of like the blue.
Wow.
And said, "Hey, Dr. Steve, it's Miss Coates," And it turns out she's a big Trump fan, and she just we just had the most amazing back and forth. But she said to me, your education that you got was probably the last year of a real good American education. Because I
Wow.
would, up to that time, when I thought of school, I thought of George Washington, I thought of Franklin, I thought of Nathan Hale. I regret that I have but one life to give my country. It was purely nationalist. It was very traditionalist.
Mhm.
Prayer had just been taken out about a decade earlier, so we still had the moment of silence and things like that. I mean, it was you left school with this paideia. You left
Mm.
school with this, not with information, but with this formation of what it meant to be an American. I belong to a great story of incredibly noble and brave men. And now it's my turn to take my place
Mhm.
in that story. That is not what kids are
No.
learning today.
No. No.
That is not what the guy. And then if you could even see it in the mission statements, vision statements of schools, they're never about how do we create solid American citizens to be patriotic and to love their cultures, customs, and traditions. No, it's always check it out. Do a search. Look at any school on the internet. It's always we exist to create global citizens, the
Yeah.
next generation of global citizens.
Yeah.
And as part of that, they teach you to hate your country. So what is happening, and the beauty of it, is we're seeing what we call a classical education renaissance, where we're going back to the Latin, to the Greek, to the great books, to theology as the queen of sciences that binds it all together. And that kind of paideia, that kind of education is reawakening, I think, a hunger and a thirst for American civic renewal. And it's beautiful. So culture begins in the classroom in many respects. If we're not passing it down through this paideia model, there's always going to be a paideia. So the
Mhm.
question is, what do you
Yeah.
pass? Again, just like a religion,
Yeah.
what are you paideiaing? What are you passing down? And the beauty is, in 1994, there were only about 10 classical schools in the entire nation. Today, it's approaching 1,000. So
Wow.
they're just absolutely exploding. I before we chatted before we started the interview, you and I were chatting, and I told you yesterday I had a wonderful meeting, the very first board meeting for the Classical School Association of Brazil, and now
Yeah.
I think they have about 100 classical schools throughout their entire country.
Wow.
It's brand new. It started in 2018. It's moving faster than we are.
Yeah.
And again, it's the same thing. They want to renew a sense of Christian Brazil, and they want to pass that down of Western society to their Western civilization to their students, and they're eating it up. They're loving it. So this is just the beginning. It's amazing stuff, but culture begins in the classroom.
Well, that leads me to kind of my final question. You've been very generous with your time, but let's assume that we see the trends that are taking place right now. Let's assume that we see kind of this spiritual renewal, this cultural renewal, because here's one thing that I don't think the right has done a very good job of, and it's something that you've attempted to tackle, and I'm very grateful for it. And it's not just about what unifies the right and what we oppose, but it's actually about conceiving of something, of thinking of something that is, again, worth fighting for.
Yeah.
We've already identified the things worth fighting against, the things worth fighting for. As you look at what you refer to as this great awakening that's taking place, and how this great awakening is not just political, it's cultural,
Right.
it's religious,
It's
it's all,
economic. It's
it's
every yeah.
economic,
Yeah.
all of these
Yeah.
things together.
Yeah.
Let's assume, God help us, we can pull it off.
Yeah.
Right? Paint us a picture of 2035. Paint us a picture a decade from now.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that we're potentially looking forward to or seeing, manifest?
Yeah, if we pull it off, and I do think we will. I
Mm.
think God spared Trump on J13 in Butler, and he so he's not done with America yet. And I see a nation with secure borders. I don't think we're ever going back at this point. I see a nation of vibrant religious and community life in accordance, particularly with young people returning to the church. I see a very strong culture of family and a total rejection of the trans nonsense. I see thriving local economies, free from woke corporate control. We've seen it on YouTube. YouTube was suppressing us big time back in 2021, 22. That's all gone. They're just like, yeah, go for it. You're good. I think we're going to see a renewed sense, a very Reagan-esque sense of our purpose as a shining city on a hill. I think by 2035, really big. I mean, this is kind of what I'm excited about. If I could see Trump doing this in the last half of his presidency, but he's a builder. And one of the things he talked about is building freedom cities, 10 new freedom cities. So I'm envisioning robust mega regions where you have Boston, New York, and Philly kind of all wrapped together and connected together by trains. That's what they're calling them, more mega regions, the Dallas-Fort Worth area and so forth. These mega regions with these kind of failing cities, if we start seeing new cities rising up as the focal point within these mega regions, that's going to change everything just in terms of our dynamism. I think we're going to see the parallel economy officially become the true economy, the patriot economy. We're not parallel anymore. We are the media, as Elon likes to point out. And I think political influence will increasingly shift toward communities of faith. I do think we're going to look at virtue and wisdom, just like our founding fathers recognized. You quoted John Adams. We're going to see that as the key to not just self-governance, but flourishing governance. And then that enables our government to remain relatively small, dealing with border security, economic security, and then protecting our culture rather than denigrating it. I think education, commerce, cultural life will reflect more classical Christian American identity and the principles which always involve, they're not mullahs, they always involve liberty, virtue, duty, freedom, and the like. I honestly believe that faith, family, freedom, vision is where we're moving. We've got the wind at our back. Yeah, we're going to get a lot, the demons don't like it. We're going to get a lot of pushback, but you can't fight with an empty tomb.
Wow. Well, I think I got to say right now, I find that very encouraging. And I find a lot of truth in it, because I do think that people are searching for something a little bit deeper right now. And they do want to believe in not only the greatness of the United States in purely economic or nationalist terms, although that's part of it, but it is the idea that we do want America to also represent something good and noble. And I think more and more people recognize that if you want it to represent something good and noble, then the people inhabit it need to be good and noble.
Well said.
And if you want that, then you need to understand what the source of goodness and nobility is. So, Dr. Turley, this has been a blast, man. I'm going to tell you right now, it's lucky. Man. It's lucky that you only promised me an hour. Otherwise, I'd have you on here for at least another hour, going even deeper, because the book has so much to discuss. And it really, again, one of the things I appreciate is the depth with which you go into issues that are just not strictly political, but really understanding these cultural, economic, social undertones which are impacting so much. So once again, tell everyone where can they find the book, where they can find more about you.
Yeah, where's my book? I got one right here. There it is. America Awakened, The Collapse of Globalism, Return to Faith, Family, and Freedom. You just get it on Amazon. I know we have a website, but I always forget the website address. Well, we can send it to you guys.
I think I got it, turleytalks.com.
There you go. So there you go. I know that one. Yeah.
TURLEY talks.com. Go check out the website. Go check out the YouTube page and go follow him. Look, this is another thing where Elon Musk says we're the media now. Part of the reason why you're seeing the success of the Trump administration and a lot of these movements is because it's no longer going through this singular lens of whether it's Hollywood or, the legacy media. Yeah. So one of the best ways that you can support is not only go out there, buy the book, but actually go out there, follow and listen, give likes, give subscribes. Those things are always very, very helpful. Dr. Turley, once again, thank you very much for joining us. And thank all of you for joining us. Let us know what you thought in the comments. Appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next episode.